Welcome to this month's Creation Justice webinar, a gathering place for building a faith-rooted and faith-sustained movement addressing many of the critical issues in our world today. I'm Brooks Barrett, the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ. I'm joined by my co-host, the Reverend Michael Malcolm, who is the Executive Director for the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. Michael, we often talk about the Warren County Civil Disobedience Campaign as the watershed event for the environmental justice movement. Many in our audience know the story of Dolly Burwell, Benjamin Chavis, Leon White, and others leading 6 weeks of civil disobedience in which over 500 people got arrested and the consciousness of the nation was pricked. That wasn't just a spontaneous eruption. A lot of meetings at Baptist church took place, a lot of planning took place, a lot of strategizing went into that. And listening to Burwell and Chavis as we did last month for our webinar and on other occasions, what stands out to me is also the faith dimension of what kickstarted that movement. We might think of strategy as something that might involve putting a plan to paper and having lots of charts with bullet point goals. But ultimately, there is a real spiritual component to strategy. As Marshall Gantz says in his book, Why David Sometimes Wins, strategy requires the courage to venture into the unknown, risk failure, and commit to a course of action that we can only hypothesize will yield the desired outcome. In other words, strategy requires a bit of faith. We might not know how things will turn out, but we do know that sometimes David wins. Sometimes a small group of people meeting in a church in rural North Carolina can start an international movement. The courage to act in the face of uncertainty is a scary thing, but it's also a beautiful thing where so much inspiration is to be found. What are you thinking, Michael, as we start this webinar?
Brooks, I'm thinking of the countless movements that have come out of the necessity for change, and many of which the UCC has been leaders on or a huge part of. One of the stories, however, that I'm often grounded by in this work is the story or the narrative of when the children of Israel were under threat and they all went into the temple and began to pray and to fast. They committed themselves to fasting and focus in their prayer. And it was when they came together and when they started to strategize that God began to speak. I think that's a lesson for us all today on this webinar and listening. It's when we come together, when we have a shared goal, which we have right now. We're under threat right now. When we come together and we began to strategize on a shared goal together, that's when I believe God will speak and God will move. I look forward to hearing from these experts today that will be speaking to us to help us in our path for being able to come together and to strategize together for a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for that grounding. And let me go right into introducing our guests for today. In the order in which they'll be speaking, we'll have Maliyah Womack, who is a program associate at the Climate Advocacy Lab, where she supports climate advocates in using evidence-based strategies to strengthen their campaigns. She brings expertise in community engagement, training design, and building collaborative networks across the climate movement. Outside of work, Maliyah enjoys exploring local hiking trails and lounging around with her cats. That sounds, I like that. That's good. And up next, we'll then have KyungSun Lee, who is the Senior Program Manager of Clean Energy at the Climate Advocacy Lab. She leads efforts to convene partners and disseminate the latest insights on clean energy organizing and advocacy across the country. This issue is personal to her as a resident of one of the fastest growing data center hubs in Arlington, Virginia. And then finally, we have with us Justin Rolfe-Redding, who is a social scientist with the Climate Advocacy Lab based in Denver. He has over 20 years of experience as both an environmental organizer and researcher. In his free time, he enjoys vegan cooking, whiskey, and climbing in the mountains. So thank you all for joining us. Maliyah, if you could get us started.
Awesome. Just want to make sure everyone can see the slides okay? Perfect. Well, hello everyone. Nice to meet you all. As Brooke said, my name is Maliyah Womack. I am the program associate with the Climate Advocacy Lab, and I'm joined by my colleagues KyungSun Lee and Rolfe-Redding. Today, we are going to go ahead and dive into strategies that meet the moment and help you guys amplify your advocacy. To review our agenda for today, we are going to start with a brief introduction to the lab, who we are, what we do, and explore some ways that we can continue to support you all. We'll then pass it over to KyungSun, who will speak a little bit more to some clean energy insights and lessons learned from some of our partners. Then we will pass it to Justin to cover a couple of different topics, from policymaker contact to hope and apathy, and then shifting it into a movement context. From there, we will kind of do a quick recap and cover some ways that you all can stay connected with us. If you have any questions or ideas that you'd like to workshop, we're very, very happy to help. And then we will close today's session by handing it back off to Brooks with a Q&A. So with that, do just want to give a little bit of background here about who we are and what we do here at the lab. So the Climate Advocacy Lab has been around for about 10 years now. We just hit our 10-year anniversary back in March. And we really started the Climate Advocacy Lab with the intention to help equip folks in the U.S. climate movement with evidence-based insights, skills, and connections they need to build durable power and win equitable solutions. And we do that in a couple of different ways. So we have a wide variety of program areas that we work through here at the lab, but some of our primary areas that can be most beneficial to our community and also our members are shown on the screen with us today. So first, we have our community, which is a large group spanning social scientists, organizers, advocates, data scientists, and more. Then we have our insights, which we pull and synthesize patterns and trends and help to share that out with folks in the movement. We then have our trainings, where we work to help amplify and educate folks with various skills that they need to help build their confidence in the movement. And then we also help to conduct, share, and synthesize research that's going on in the field, and with a particular lens to social science to help us figure out how we can learn from things in the past and help to strengthen our movement moving forward. And so just for a little bit more context, right, how do we really execute these programs and help support folks in the movement? So as I mentioned previously, our community is a large group of over 4,000 members of advocates, organizers, social scientists, data scientists, funders, you name it, they're probably in our community. And we work really hard to do one-on-ones, coaching, and provide different ways for folks in the movement to connect with each other if they are working on similar projects or have similar ideas, looking for thought partnership, things of that nature. We really aim to help support everyone in our community in their advocacy. We also have a Slack community where we like to encourage folks to be able to share any resources, trainings, or funding opportunities that they may find with the broader lab community. And we, as the lab team, regularly share out those forms of resources as well. Then with our insights, we do share a weekly newsletter where we utilize a blog-styled insight, pull from our resource library. We can sometimes share data insights or have special features that revolve specifically around our clean energy and IRA hub, or specifically around our training programs, but really trying to provide weekly insights to our community to help educate and further their own research. We also have our training program, which, as I mentioned previously, we host a wide variety of trainings from varying skill sets to help equip folks in the movement with the skills that they need to confidently execute their campaigns, projects, or initiatives. We also like to record these trainings and ensure that we have these posted in our resource library so that everyone in our community has the opportunity to review, learn, and relearn if they need to. And then finally, we have our research program, which, as I mentioned, through various forms of field research or specialized projects, we really work to help synthesize the data that we're finding and really answer some of our advocates' key questions to help them really strengthen their initiatives moving forward. Our lab team has grown quite a bit over the past year. We previously were about a team of 7, but have now grown to a team of 13. And with this, we do share a wide variety of knowledge and skills across the team. So as you are working through your advocacy efforts, we really do try to do our best to connect folks in the community with team members that are most likely to be able to help them or help increase their knowledge. So do keep in mind that while it is myself, KyungSun, and Justin on the call today, we do have plenty of other team members that are also here and able to help you all through your work. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it to KyungSun to share some clean energy insights.
Hi everyone, it's really great to meet you all. My name is KyungSun, she, her pronouns, and I'm really excited to talk to you all today, especially because I got my roots in faith-based organizing, and I carry that with me in my personal life, and my current church home has been a long-standing partner with First Congregational UCC out here in DC. So this is a personal stake for me, as well as a professional one. So my job is to really look at the landscape of what's happening in clean energy organizing and advocacy. And what I want to share with you today is a lot of the work of our partners who have been working to organize and educate the public that I think will be really valuable on how you can build your next set of strategies to educate and advocate and mobilize your legislators. So next slide, please. So the first kind of insights I want to bring to you is from our recent deep canvassing program that we had evaluated in partnership with a group called People's Action and their affiliates. They were looking to do very hyper-localized deep canvassing efforts in 2 communities, Lacey Township, New Jersey, and Searsport, Maine, with the goal to build public support for offshore wind projects that were either coming down the near future and or already in the process of being sited. And to ground us a bit in, the landscape of what we're talking about, this is a picture of Lacey Township, New Jersey. You can see it's a very beautiful coastal community there. And something I want for you all to keep in mind is that, these are going to be very hyper-localized campaigns that I'm describing. And I see that all of you are from across the country. So I would love to hear in the chat what you feel like is resonating with you based on what I share, and what you feel like is slightly different or an important nuance to share about your community and their reaction. So can you go to next slide? So here is a picture of Searsport, Maine as well, which is the second area where the deep canvassing program happened. So the overall context for those unfamiliar with offshore wind and kind of the recent developments here is that it's had its fits and starts in these 2 areas in particular. There's been multi-year moratorias. There's been an onslaught of mis and disinfo by the opposition. You might have heard some people online, especially, repeat this mis and disinfo of, the turbines causing headaches, birds being killed, etc. And so this context is really important because the canvassers and our partner organizations had this deep challenge of running a field program with their given budget, trying to really build public support in the face of pretty hostile conditions. And some of the initial things that came out of these deep canvas is that, one, community members actually had pretty weakly developed understanding and attitudes. And even though they did repeat the mis and disinfo, when pressed further for evidence or a deeper evaluation of what they were saying, they really couldn't provide any more depth. So there's hope for that right there. There was also a lot of concerns around community identity and wildlife impacts. You know, people do have concerns about how new projects will change the cultural and economic makeup of their community, which I'm sure a lot of us on this call can resonate. So next slide. So from that, I wanted to surface some helpful insights. So one of them is that initially, a lot of the canvassers had actually tried to open up conversations with residents by coming out with their position on why they think offshore wind projects are really good for the community. And part of this is because they wanted to avoid diving straight into the concerns and get into the defensiveness that people might show. But they quickly realized that it was actually leaning into hearing people's personal experiences, people's concerns that actually then neutralize the defensiveness that people had at the door and then pave the way for people to have more open conversations and open mind about why offshore wind projects might be good for their community. So legitimizing and validating people's concerns and also validating that there's a lot of complex emotions and a lot of complex history within our communities that prevent people from immediately being supportive of projects like this was a really important part to doing that public education piece. Next slide, please. So the second piece of this is that once folks at the doors were able to then pave the way to opening up conversations about why offshore wind projects could be good, a tactic that they found really effective is to also really center the community benefits that people can have, but not just that there'll be good things coming to the community, but that the community actually had the power and the agency to decide what those benefits are going to be. And as many of you know, community benefits agreements and plans are a key tool to making that agency happen and work for communities. And so being able to point to positive examples about how other communities similar to theirs have been able to leverage a CBA with companies and with the government to make sure that local jobs and the money that's created all stay and make sure are filtered down to residents has been a really positive, has led to positive conversations and support at the doors. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Maliyah, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. Oh, actually, can you go back? Sorry. So the key point here is that, you know, a lot of us are rightly very concerned with the prevalence of mis and disinfo. We will just not be able to outspend the opposition here. But based on these two deep canvassing programs, what we have extrapolated is that there is still room for a lot of public education. Again, by validating and then opening up the way to talking about the practical ways that people can make sure that they have control over the development that happens has been really effective. And so for you all here at the UCC, one way you can use these insights is that one, legislators, you know, might have a misunderstanding or may not be aware that constituents actually can be supportive of projects like this. And so as other advocates and partners of yours are working to educate the public, this is really insightful for you all to be able to take to your legislators that there needs to be more public education coming from legislators citing positive examples, citing ways that they are committed to making sure that development happens with and alongside and by people and not just happening to people. And we do have a lot more insights from our full report, which I'll drop in the chat as well and share after the webinar. And next slide, please. So another kind of area that I wanted to share about what our partners have been doing around advocacy and storytelling is around stopping the bad bills, pushing the good, particularly in our campaign from Texas. What I found really powerful there that might be useful to you all is to really consider different ways of reaching legislators. So this campaign was in particularly targeting the public and voters to reach their legislators, their Democratic legislators, to make sure that they support policies, but also vote no on the bad, like SB 819. And they did it all through digital ads in partnership with groups like Conservative Texans and Environment Texas, which is a more progressive grassroots group. And this partnership was critical in order to show that there is bipartisan support. And you can see here these two ads that they had used, where you can see one is definitely more of a conservative framing and the other is more of a progressive framing to make sure that it is speaking the language across different constituents to take action. One thing to consider is that digital ads do have a valuable role that they can play. And the reason why these two groups had in particular used digital ads is because the scale and size of a state like Texas, there's just no way that they can have enough money or the people power to really have a robust field program reaching all the communities across the state. So that's just something for you all to consider as well, especially if you are all based in a state similar in size and scope as Texas. Next slide, please. Another strategy that our partners are continuing to push on and really build upon from what we've been doing is storytelling. And now more than ever, we need to continue to diversify the types of stories that we tell, pointing to the positive impacts of clean energy projects. So I'm curious if you all can drop in the chat, how many of you all have heard that NASCAR has actually embraced electric? And I know I haven't heard that story until our partners in the Southeast had shared. And I feel like that is the type of story that we do want to be sharing out and amplifying as much as possible. That's great, Carol. And also, you know, there are important nuances in the way that we can tell stories too, right? I love that there's also a story that our partners in the Southeast had shared about how a rural North Carolina town has been forging ahead on clean energy projects despite all of the uncertainty happening with this administration. And then also elevating the ways in which clean energy projects has fulfilled a sacred obligation of our people in partnership with Indigenous communities. Next slide, please. So here is how our partners and us at the lab have been thinking about the types of stories we need that can help inform the types of stories you want to amplify to your legislators. Health impacts and the ways that clean energy can really support and lower people's healthcare costs, support their healthcare is going to be an critical intersection to elevate. There's also no doubt going to be even more concerns and harms around people's energy bills going up, people being harmed by the lack of reliability, especially with the growing energy demand. And I will also share that our group in Texas that I just shared really used that language about the need to meet energy demand and affordability with their Texas legislators as a key talking point to make sure that they can build support. Also thinking about the lens of regional and state competitiveness, right? Not everyone's going to be swayed necessarily by the public and common good. And so also making the business case about how the more we can boost up policies that pave the way for clean energy is also a way that your regions and states can be competitive with others around them. And so all this to say is that, you know, storytelling is definitely going to be a shared and collaborative effort across our movement. So I encourage you to think about the stories that you've heard around your region and your state around clean energy that you can draw from to share and to mobilize folks to come advocate to your legislators, and which stories you still need that you can then partner with other groups to source from. Next slide, please. I'm just gonna close with leaving you two strategies that our groups recently talked about as we press on forward. So one of them that's going to be key is going to be really leveraging your state and regional clean energy and climate plans. For those of you all that have had this, definitely use it as a point to advocate to your legislators that in spite of federal funding drying up, that this is a mandate and a call that they had planned for and had put out publicly, and that they should be able to provide funding to be able to fulfill the plans and commitments that they had made to the public. And the second piece is around coalitions. Every single one of our groups always talks about the importance of making sure that we do this work in partnership and in coalition with one another. And I've yet to hear a group that is saying that they have been able to pass clean energy projects and funding and plans all on their own. So I highly encourage you all to be in conversation with labor, with messaging groups, with groups who are more focused on health, etc. And I think I have one more slide, Maliyah. Oh, nope. So I'll just leave you all with some links on how you can get plugged in and continue to receive information about what we're seeing on the ground with clean energy advocacy and organizing. And I'll pass it over to Justin.
Thanks so much for that, KyungSun, and good to be joining you all today on the front lines of our movement. It's our honor and privilege to be able to share with you insights that we've gleaned from research and experience here at the Climate Advocacy Lab. And I'll be running through a few of those on several topics here. And to just briefly note, we will be sharing links to more resources, decks and trainings that we're drawing from for today. We only have the chance to really get the tip of the iceberg, as you can imagine here. And so I would encourage you all to take what we're offering as a bit of a teaser taster platter and move forward there. So the first topic I'll be addressing today is the work of what we call policymaker contact. You might refer to as lobbying or educating your legislators. And I know that's the work that a lot of UCC chapters are engaged in. So I wanted to touch on some of the research-based best practices that we've discovered for this work. And on that culinary theme of taster platter I mentioned a second ago, on the next slide, we'll see that I'd like to use this visual metaphor of the reveal of a plate of one trick that we think is the most valuable thing that you can do when you're talking to policymakers to sort of win them over. And the next slide, that trick turns out to be revealing the public opinion of their own constituents, which sounds maybe surprising, but as you'll see on the next slide, it turns out even professional politicians, according to the research, are often ignorant of the opinion of their own constituents and tend to overestimate how conservative they are. And next slide will actually be ignorant of the specific climate views of their constituents. And so teaching them the truth there by showing public opinion polling can be really powerful. Now, as you do that, as you can see here, sharing stories that are local and personal is very powerful. When we poll members of Congress, the biggest disparity between what they say they are getting from people who are lobbying them and what they want to be getting is around this question of local impacts and personal stories. So this is what policymakers say they want to hear, and it's what they're not hearing. So we really need to improve that. And other research that looks at grassroots activists in the climate movement and their lobbying techniques finds that that notion of personal stories is something that they don't want to bring. They think it's all about facts and figures. And so they neglect this really powerful strategy that policymakers are actually extremely thirsty for. So we like to emphasize here that a lot of folks think stories might not work, but it's really what legislators want to hear. And on the next slide, this I think just reinforces a lot of the techniques that you all UCC chapters use, where I know you're trying to build a lot of long-term personal relationships with policymakers. On the next slide, research has validated that that personal contact is actually the most powerful way to engage with people. And on the next slide, you'll see that it's as powerful as 47 pieces of contact from online sources. So there's a very strong preference for policymakers to hear from their constituents in person. So keep on planning those office visits and meetings. If you go to the next slide, Maliyah. Oh, thanks. There we are. So that's that research that validated that trade-off. And as you're doing those visits, it's also, as you probably know, to build a long-term durable relationship, really important to have repeated contact, as you'll see on the next slide. There are a few things that we recommend in terms of going forth with regular contact with your policymakers. Research finds that shows that they're more likely to kind of remember the information that you're providing them and to their staff. And on the next slide, it'll also show that and a few bullets in here that you can send follow-ups as another way to ensure that people are hearing from you. And the way I always think about it is, do the people, like especially the staff in a policymaker's office, remember your name? And if they do, and they know you by a first name basis, then you're talking to them enough. If not, maybe you need to talk to them some more. In terms of where that in-person contact can happen, on the next slide, we actually find in research that not going to those formal office visits, but trying to find policymakers in kind of their native habitat in district and in informal settings is really powerful. Really on the next slide, that these are what we call sort of social lobbying, showing up to, where they shop, where their kids play, sports. All these are, social mixers, cocktail hours are really even more powerful as a way than kind of the formal sit down in office typical visit to reach people. So think kind of creatively and out of the box about your policymaker contact. Maliyah, we'll go from the context of how you engage and educate your policymakers to sort of how you engage with and support both yourselves and your own activists and supporters in your local chapters, and how you deal with the apathy and powerlessness that people can sometimes feel, and the sort of hope that we need to inculcate in people to overcome that. So if we hop forward a couple slides to that one, we have here kind of like 4 key tips to motivate activists to take action on the next slide. And the first of those is to focus on empowerment, or we call it in psychology efficacy. Give people the confidence that they can take action and their actions matter. And on the next slide, just one quick example of how that was done during the first Trump administration. This practical guide for engaging with the EPA offered all these basic tips just on how the process worked and how people could engage and how to be an effective activist in this process. So think about the ways you can ensure your supporters and activists and people in your chapters that what they're doing really matters and makes a difference. Then on the next slide, our second technique for motivating activists is to use what we call social norms. Remind them that others like them are also taking action. Humans are a social animal. We want to be with a group of people like us and know that we're not alone. And that's hugely empowering. And so on the next slide, we have an example of how we've done that. This is a little experiment that we've taken, where we changed that highlighted language that you see in this ad. And on the next slide, we'll see when we switched it out from a generic, just climate change is an important language, to on the right, you are not alone. A growing number of people like you is concerned, that we saw that the sharing of the report in that ad actually went up. So talk less about climate change, talk more about other people who care, and bring people in that way. And that's a way to fight back against what we call the spiral of silence, when people don't talk about climate change enough. And then on the next slide, we have our third technique, which is to engage in hope and embrace the emotional side of people. I'm sure coming from a faith tradition, this is a natural thing for you all to do. But we can talk about the concerns and the problems out there, but we also need to ensure people that there are solutions and that there is a path forward. The next slide, we have an example of how you can do that through visual language, which is a great way to kind of get past people's psychological orientation of being intellectual and fact-based and just get deep to their heart and to their emotions. This site, Climate Visuals, has researched and evidence-backed images on a great variety of topics. So you can search for positive or hope-based images to use in your work, or just find your own. But get to people's hearts and souls and inculcate that sense of hope to push through even these darkest of times. On the next slide, our final technique for motivating activists and addressing apathy is to foster a sense of identity. Again, we are social animals. People want to have a sense that they have a shared identity with others that is like the basis for their engagement. Again, as those in a faith and church context, you have that shared identity already, and bridging that into an identity of activism and action taking can really ground people very powerfully and motivate them, in terms of the core of their being is wrapped up in their work. And on the next slide, we have an example of that being done where an organization helped their volunteers articulate their own goals in one set of interactions, and then parroted that goal back to them. You see in that highlighted section of their follow-up email, they said, this is what you wrote about why it was important to take action. And when they did that versus their standard message, they found a dramatic increase in the rate of action taken. So help people personalize and identify and ground themselves in their own reasons and motivations and identity to take action. So that's on the next slide, summarizing our 4 ways to take action or to engage folks to take action, just quickly summarized there. And I think I'm going to leave it there for you today. There's more content that we'll be sharing with you around the overall movement context, and I think where we are in terms of public opinion. But I want to give us lots of time for Maliyah to close us out and to get to Q&A. But if anyone is interested in our take on where we are in terms of public opinion and what that means for our strategy going forward, happy to address that in Q&A, and we can come back to it. So back over to you, Maliyah.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. And thank you, KyungSun, also for sharing. Yeah, so just getting into some next steps here before we dive into Q&A. Want to encourage everyone on the call to try and stay connected with us here at the lab. We really are here to help support you all and help give you all the skills and insights that you need to continue advocating in your own communities. And so first plug here, we love having new people join our community and want to, share with you all to sign up to become a member with us here at the lab. This is a 100% free membership. It is individual based though, so do keep that in mind as you guys apply. But becoming a member at the lab is then going to give you all access to discover all of our resources, tools, insights, trainings, and also see opportunities coming up in the future to help learn and grow your own impact. And then from there, also just want to encourage folks to book some time to chat with a lab team member. Justin, KyungSun, and myself will be sharing our Once Hub links that I know will get plugged into the follow-up email, and definitely want to encourage folks, if you have any questions or want just some thought partnership around some ideas you guys have, really want to encourage you guys to, book some time to chat with one of us to see how we can support your work. And with that, just want to, again, thank everyone for their attentiveness and being present with us during today's training. And I will pass it back over to Brooks so we can get into some Q&A.
Great. Thank you for each of those terrific presentations. That was outstanding. We have time for questions. And so while our audience includes those in the Q&A chat function, I'll just begin with this one. I want to kind of go back, KyungSun, to your presentation. I was just wondering if you can kind of help paint a little bit more of a picture for us for what deep canvassing can accomplish, I guess. I kind of remember years ago learning about deep canvassing by hearing sort of like stories of success of how people, I think it was in Minnesota, like marriage equality opinion changed through a campaign of deep canvassing, and that was really successful. Like what makes it successful, is it really kind of a dialogue and listening, or is there ever like an ask of the person that whose door you've knocked on, that might engage them in deeper participation beyond the conversation? Like, those are just some of the questions I have as I'm trying to like paint a picture for us for what deep canvassing can look like.
Yeah, sure. And I'm happy to share a link to a resource afterwards also. Yeah, so I would say deep canvassing has had a lot of evaluation evidence behind it. It's really a tool that has a very particular structure. So like you start off at the door asking people to rate on a scale of like 1 to 10 how they feel about a particular issue. So that's kind of like your initial metric for where people are at. And then from there, you develop a Canvas script to kind of guide people to opening up a conversation. I would say that these are considered more like longer form conversations. They can range from like 10 to 15 minutes, ideally all the way up until 30 minutes. And I would say that they don't usually recommend to go more like up to an hour, especially because the goal is to be able to target a specific community, and have, succinct and effective conversations at the doors. And a 1 hour conversation is just not sustainable for all the doors you need to knock on. So then as you progress through the Canvas script and the conversation at the end, you then ask the person again, based on our conversation, where would you now rate how you feel about this issue or your support for this issue? And so with these two offshore wind canvassing projects, that's how they were able to measure whether or not their script was effective. And when they started to see that initially it wasn't, that's how they were able to pivot pretty quickly. And then that's when they started to see support increase.
Great, thanks. Good to hear about that success. Jess, I've got a short question and a longer question for you. First, I love kind of the pulling of the silver platter there. Where can one find, if I wanted to know the opinions for my congressional district, is there like a website that can take me to and tells me like 87% of people in Chantel Brown's district are in support of climate action? Is there a place I can go to for that?
Great question, Brooks. Just dropped a link there into the chat for the Yale Climate Opinion fact sheets, which is a great resource. I mean, if you've got other polling you're aware of, obviously go for that. But these are great kind of one-stop shop, and they're really designed for this, where you can type in your congressional district or your state, and I think they might have state legislative districts as well too, and it'll give you estimates of public opinion specific to that jurisdiction. So a very handy tool in this context, and it can print out basically as a fact sheet that you could literally just take and hand to your policymaker. It's not exactly public opinion polling. They take polling and they do some fancy analytics to sort of downscale it to small areas. They weren't able to survey every congressional district in the country independently. So be aware of that and how you're describing the results. But still, I think it's a purpose-built tool that's awesome for this tactic.
Great. And then my longer question, I wanted to follow up on your invitation to essentially to ask what public opinion means for the movement moving forward, or thinking moving forward. I think you had referenced that you could talk about that. So I wanted to invite you to dive into that.
Sure thing. Yeah. I was just reviewing kind of the latest polling. I feel like where we are kind of as a movement moment. And yeah, was trying to sort of tease out where I think we can get some lessons. And I think big picture, there is a lot of support for our movements, and we don't want to sort of forget that, first of all. So the noisy opposition and deniers are just that. They're a small minority. And but at the same time, that support is broad but kind of shallow, and the number of folks who truly support us is fairly small. If you're able to pull up some screen sharing again of your slides, I can illustrate this a little bit as I speak, the final section. And so I think to me, our movement strategy needs to be kind of grounded in, we can just go back a few slides, in an understanding that we have a small number of folks who are passionate about this issue, those of us in this room and our allies, and yeah, we want to leverage them to talk to others. So yeah, we can go forward here. A couple slides. So yeah, one more. And so this is, yeah, most people believe climate change is happening. That's why I said we have got broad but kind of flat support. The passion is limited. These vertical bars by color are from liberal Democrats to conservative Republicans. And you can see the global warming as a priority for them just drops off a cliff. So we've got the liberal Democrats on our side who really care about this. And they can be our core of support. And then on the next slide, you'll see that people generally aren't talking about climate change very much. And so, but they are aware of the impacts. So this shows that over 2/3 of people rarely or never discuss climate change with family and friends, right? So we've got most people believe in it. A few people are passionate about it. Few people are actually talking about it with one another. We know that talking to friends and family is one of the most powerful methods to kind of convert or evangelize or proselytize on this issue, as it were. We know people are primed and ready because you'll see on the next slide that climate change is happening and it's real and people are experiencing it. And that number has been going up, that green line there, over the last decade and a half. So people are seeing it now in their daily lives. They believe in it, but no one's talking to them about it. And so putting all these facts and figures together, to me, outlines a strategy, core of support. And we use those folks to talk to others about climate change in terms of its personal impacts on us. And we'll see this laid out on the next slide. And then we use that. So we gather our flock, to put it into religious terms. We preach to friends and family through those personal conversations that we know are so powerful, but we know that are also not happening. We then witness the reality of climate change that people are increasingly seeing in their lives as the way to draw them in, to make them really care and feel about it. And there's some great research on how to make the impacts of climate change felt to people in a deeply emotional way. And then that creates for us on the right there, that growing base of constituency and that political support of passionate people, moving them to really prioritize climate justice and vote on it, that creates the political will for policy change. Maybe that's already what you guys are doing and thinking, but I think just positioning us in the moment and where we are and where we need to be, to me, is a useful way to kind of guide our work going forward. So that's what I was thinking through there, Brooks, and a very long answer to your question.
No, great. Thank you. And we've got a question from the audience that's really kind of looking for a practical application to something that's in the news today. The Trump administration intends to use the repeal of the endangerment finding as grounds to ignore science and reverse the law to roll back climate protections, despite numerous court rulings saying that they can't, and overwhelming scientific evidence about climate change's devastating impact on people's lives. Can you suggest how we can use our strategies? How can we apply this to this situation that we're reading about in the news today?
Can offer some thoughts, but I know KyungSun, following the Inflation Reduction Act and recent clean energy developments, good, bad, and otherwise, is also your specialty. So you might have some thoughts here.
Yeah. Do you want to start? And then I just need a second to reread the question.
Yeah, it's a heavy moment. And yeah, thanks for that comment and being all of today's news on us. KyungSun might mimic me here, because I'm drawing on some of her thoughts, but I think, appreciating where we can play defense and where we can play offense. And at the state and local level, there's still a lot of potential for offense, to use that sort of metaphor, and to see gains. I think it's in the hands of the lawyers, right, and the policy experts at the federal level to push back against some of these unlawful actions by the current administration, and to try and hold the line where we can. I think we saw promising glimmers in what, unfortunately, was an unfortunate development of federal legislation that repealed a lot of our clean energy provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act over the summer. But we were only lost by one vote. And we saw that a lot of, people who voted for that bill to repeal those measures actually supported the measures. And it was local folks on the ground and local clean energy businesses and the jobs that was creating that were creating that pressure. And so I think we need to keep that coalition together, that cadre of different interest groups and concerned citizens who really care, and at future opportunities, bring that to bear where it can matter legislatively. But I'll turn to KyungSun maybe to talk more about exciting opportunities at the state level where I think there's a lot more hope.
Yeah, I will say that, in where we were last year, we were still facing the challenge of people, the public in general, not really knowing about the Inflation Reduction Act's benefits. And I would say that our lesson coming out of really trying to boost awareness and understanding is that, now where we're at from that point is there has been funding that's been deployed. A lot of churches, a lot of schools, and a lot of coalitions have made a lot of headway in making sure to really communicate the benefits that have already been enacted. And so I think leveraging those stories, those examples, and how they can continue to drive sustainability is going to be a really important thread to elevate to your legislators. Two things come to mind as examples of this, especially for those of you in the Southeast and the Gulf. There have been stories coming out of there that folks have been using around how a homeowner who was able to take advantage of battery storage and solar has talked about how when a lot of the hurricanes had come and they lost power, that the battery storage and solar was able to keep the lights on for them. What a powerful story. And a second one that one of our partners has used is this story around how a man who has sleep apnea and literally needs his machine in order to stay alive at night while sleeping had the power cut out while he was sleeping, and it was his battery storage that allowed him to keep breathing throughout the night and live. So there are local stories. I think the challenge is that a lot of the benefits did go to individuals, right? A lot of it did go to people who are middle and higher income. And so, and at the same time, like we still need to elevate a lot more of the community level stories in order to continue to center the equity piece of how clean energy can work for everyone and for frontline communities. So I would say continue to find those stories, the storytellers are also going to be people who are going to be critical to showing up with you for public comment, for to have in district meetings, to have meetings with your legislators.
Right. Thank you for those responses. Looking at a couple other questions here. One question is, are yard signs and billboards effective in starting conversations and raising awareness among people? Any research or on that?
That's a great question. KyungSun really might have other knowledge, but that form of kind of outdoor advertising has classically been a really hard one to study. Every political consultant and local candidate for school board, right, wants to know like, are yard signs a worthwhile investment? So I've heard that asked in many, consultancy circles over the years and never heard like a great answer. What I'd say is we have more research around the value of like digital advertising, as KyungSun reviewed, where you can sort of target and do it at scale in ways sort of maybe analogous to what yard signs and billboards can do. But yeah, I would say anything that gets people thinking about it and front of mind. As I said, people do believe in climate change by and large, but it's just a very back of mind thing. So I would say none of these could be bad things to try out and see if in your community you're seeing an effect. If it's something you're considering buying into, maybe create some kind of URL or QR code, on your yard signs or something on the billboard so you can see if people are visiting the site and to give you an indication if it's kind of landing with people. And that would be my suggestion to sort of measure it in your own context. And if you find out it works, let us know. We'd love to share that with the rest of the community.
Definitely, Larry.
Perfect.
Keep us posted. The other thing that I'll add is, while I don't know the evidence around yard signs and billboards in particular, one story that comes to mind is one of our partners at Rewiring America, Sarah, who heads the communications work there, talks about how she regularly hosts heat pump parties in her neighborhood. And she uses those to spur the conversations. And then from those heat pump parties, when her neighbors start getting heat pumps themselves, using that word of mouth to then educate other neighbors, and that, and now her neighborhood, she was saying, has one of the highest rates of heat pump adoption. And so, you know, I do think that yard signs and billboards, we have to think of it more as like, how does that serve? Like, I don't think the yard signs and billboards necessarily spark the conversation, but more how can they be used to supplement the conversations that you start to have. And we really see a lot of our partners using like a multi-faceted strategy, right? Like targeting specific areas, really inundating and saturating very local areas with clean energy information. If we're doing it statewide, again, it's like a multi-pronged strategy of both online and in person. So always happy to talk through some of the strategies that you think might be effective for your particular area as well.
Yeah,
I would
great. Go ahead.
So sorry. Also, just wanted to add something in that I learned when I was a fellow with Defend Our Future. There are some states and some areas that do have like yard signs or billboards that are related to the climate crisis. One particular example that I recall is in Florida. I cannot specifically recall the name of the gentleman who started this, but essentially to spark conversation about the climate crisis in his neighborhood, started posting a yard sign with a number on it, right? So like number 5, and that stood for the number of feet above sea level their homes were. And so used that form of, I guess, like a visual to kind of spark a conversation amongst his neighbors because it targeted their property value, right? And so that was something that really grasped the attention of the folks in his community. So it is something that I have heard across the movement, but similarly to KyungSun, I don't have any like firm like evidence based insights to the effectiveness of those forms of strategies. But I do know it is something that is softly used in various states. So that's all that I wanted to
Great.
add there.
Thank you. I'll drop in the chat an article I once came across from a staff member at Tectonic, which is an organization that runs campaigns in different countries. And so their staff member gives a strong take sort of against awareness campaigns in general. But I think in some ways this conversation is a little slightly different because we're talking about something that's used to generate conversations. But I did find this article interesting. So it does give a kind of a strong take on awareness campaigns based on some research. And so we're at the end of our time. I wish we could kind of talk longer and dive deeper into some of these topics, but as what you said earlier, we're kind of at the tip of the iceberg with this, and we know that your website and that you have made yourself sort of available really generously to our audience. So thank you so much for that. I mean, this is a great start for us, and getting us well resourced and equipped to be effective advocates. For our audience, we will be back next month. Looking forward to seeing you out. We're going to be focusing with some really terrific people who are going to be focusing on data centers and AI and so forth, and some grassroots efforts to address that. And so looking forward to that webinar and seeing you all again. Thank you to our guests. You all were terrific. Thanks so much for giving of your time and your wisdom and insights. Take care, everyone.
Thank you,
so
Brooke.
Thank you so much.
For having
Good
us.
work out there, folks.